My name's Josephine Reichert and I run Art Gallery, and I'm here with Joanna today. Joanna's show Passing was at the gallery for the past month, and we've just taken it down, and we just thought we'd sit down and have a little chat about it. And my first question was, how do you feel now that the exhibition's come down in looking over the last month?
Okay, well, what I think is really good for me as an artist is to be able to have all the work in one place, like a solo exhibition, without it, this sounds deeply selfish, but without sharing the space with another artist. So there's nothing to stop you from actually being completely focused in what you're doing, and whether it's successful or not. And that brings into play all kinds of practical issues with the medium and the light and the space, but also in terms of the content of the work. And because you've got each piece in some way, what's the word I'm trying to think, corroborates, each piece sort of adds to the medium, because they're kind of connected in subject. So it's quite it's a kind of full, for me, experience of my work, so I can see whether it's communicating what is the relationship with the projection and the smaller works, and how successful is a very large projection like this, because as we were saying before, I think it not only is it the largest projection that I've done of that piece, but also we have managed to get a life-size projection, because I'm interested in this immersive kind of use of video where the viewer can kind of enter the space, with the camera. So that's a kind of key interest. So the opportunity to come here and to show in this space has been great, because I've been able to really spread my wings and also focus on the subject of the work and take account.
And as you already mentioned, the experience of the viewer, so what was your ideas behind choosing this, sort of including the viewer into your walk through these buildings?
So it's the idea that the space of these quite abandoned buildings, deserted spaces, but the idea of these two going through these two spaces with the camera is the idea that the passage of someone walking through a space brings it into the present, activates it. So these spaces are kind of lying dormant, waiting for a developer, waiting to be changed, waiting for, suspended space, suspended building. And the act of walking through is a kind of temporary act of bringing something into the present day. But it's also it's kind of play with solitariness and union, because the camera, it's a kind of solitary passage. You can see that in the bigger piece, the big projection, the Prynage piece. You can catch the shadow of me as in this instance holding the camera. So it's one person walking through, but actually by expanding that screen to the larger size, to make it life size, I can sort of take the viewer through. So it's rather like sort of Hollywood films without the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Very often in Hollywood you've got a tracking camera. What do they call it? A ghost ride, I think, when they first strapped a camera to a train. So you've got that idea of moving through space with the camera without there being a kind of story, fictive story going on. And that quite interests me. Mm-hmm. So it's very much about movement. Whereas the two prints are a much more obvious ruined building, which it's a building that's had different identities through time. I think it was originally a munitions building certainly in the Second World War, and then it's now a car shed. So it's kind of a degraded building, if you like, and you can see, I made a film of walking around it, which you might remember, and so you can see the different add-ons of it. So it's really like a kind of, so the film, the film I made of it was like going into it, whereas the photographs are just a kind of still capturing of it in that moment of first sight. And then I just, not just, because it was, I ghosted I whited out the screen in the second print, so it was like hardly there. So it's the idea of the memory of the space. So just playing around with what photography might do for me, because that's another newish medium, not using photography purely as documentation. Do you want me to go on, or should I let you answer a question? Ask me a question.
Well, I was just going to comment that I think it's interesting that you just mentioned the word ghost twice.
Yes.
And actually, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but there is, I think, notions of something I don't know,
From the
ethereal or
well, yes, it's
something
not
in
meant
it.
to be. I'm not interested in anything supernatural or anything like that. I just use the word ghost because it's like something that is barely material, and I'm quite interested in materiality, background in sculpture. So, I like excessive materiality, but I also like it when materiality disappears. And I suppose the underlying theme is an interest in transience. So something material disappearing or something disappearing and coming into materiality. So it's that change in substance interests me. But I suppose the difference is that I'm using an image-based medium to capture that rather than actually making things with my hands and using material processes to show change.
And how do you feel that this work connects to an area like this of Birmingham where there's a lot of abandoned buildings?
Well, that's correct, because I was going to say, and that the space is very sympathetic, although my work's quite clean and aesthetic, I think, certainly, and that's interesting in relationship to some of the other shows you're going to have this year. It's a really nice contrast, to put that kind of quite clean looking work, because it's even if it's a ruined building, there is an aesthetic in the work, and I think that's something I always have. So my rather clean ruins are going into a space that, it's been really cleaned up, but you'd only have to go up the stairway and through the building to see that it's a building that's just been appropriated with a different history. So there's a sympathy in the building, and that's quite interesting to look at in relationship to when I've shown it in a very pristine, shown work in a very pristine space without kind of history. There's kind of a history here. And it's very sympathetic. I think it interests me. So to take it outside the building into the space of Birmingham, it's great to put work that has a kind of rural, landscapey thing, possibly there in the ground of the work, which is kind of at odds with putting it into the city. And I quite like that contrast. So I'd like to show, images or work that has a kind of feel of the city in the country. I like that changeover of the two different environments, really, because they're both part of our world, both part of our experience, and the contemporary rural environment is full of as much conflict and issues as the town in a different way. It isn't necessarily romantic. When one looks at landscape work and work, because we're Brits, or I'm a Brit, you think, there's a history of romanticism, but I'm more interested in looking at something more contemporary around, and what happens to concrete buildings when they get old, when they're abandoned, things like that. So, Birmingham is full of totally different kinds of buildings all the time, just driving up through Moseley. Was it Moseley? Through King's Heath, through that last stretch, there's an amazing Victorian building on the side, and then you've got a really kind of crass modern building. And Birmingham's got all those tensions and conflicts in it, like the new library. So it's a very interesting city, really, and it has an energy, a pulse. And it's been great. It's been interesting showing in this area, because this is an area that I don't know. I kind of know the centre of Birmingham, but I don't know this area.
And as we're talking about Birmingham, my last question was actually in relation to Birmingham and the art scene in Birmingham. Could you just say something about your connection to it and also what you think of it?
Well, my connection was quite academic, because from the 80s onwards I worked at, what's it called now? BIAD, British Birmingham Institute of Art and Design, which is part of the University of something. It used to be called Central England, but I'm not sure what it's called now.
Birmingham City University.
Birmingham City University. So I've had a long relationship with it, with the college, and I come back every year, and so that's been my experience of the art scene in Birmingham. But I have recently been very aware of art organisations starting up that are getting reviewed, and I know some of the people that are involved in it. So that is, it's always, that energy is harnessed to art, and that's very important. But it's a different thing from the kind of the art world that you get in this bigger city of London, because it isn't so much to do with commodification of buying art. It isn't about purchasing. It's not related to capitalism in the same way. So there will be a different kind of work that goes on in Birmingham, I think, because that is a crucial difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for showing as well. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you very much, Josie. It's been a really good experience for me. Great to work with you again in a different way. Really good to show in Birmingham in this kind of space, and it's been very good for me to reflect, being able to have all the work together, as I said. So terrific, thank you. And thank you, Art Gallery. And all the best to art for the future. May it go from strength to strength.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing the future shows.